Alright, today we're going to be adding and subtracting fractions with mixed numbers. For our vocabulary that we're going to begin with, we have numerator as our first word. We know that a numerator is the top number of a fraction. So if I have 3/4, the top number would be 3, meaning 3 is my numerator. The opposite of a numerator is a denominator. So the denominator would be the bottom number of a fraction. Working with the same fraction, 3/4, I know that my bottom number is 4, so 4 is my denominator. A mixed number is something we've seen this year. Mixed numbers are a whole number and a fraction combined. So if I had my 3/4 that we've been working with and I put a 2 in front of it, it becomes a mixed number because I have a whole number and a fraction. In order to add or subtract a fraction, the steps are to first list the problem vertically. Then we'll find a common denominator if it doesn't already have one. Then we'll add or subtract the numerators depending on the operation. And if our answer is an improper fraction, meaning the top number is bigger than the bottom, we are going to turn it into a mixed number. So our first example we're going to work with is 1/2 plus 7/8. We see that this problem is not written vertically yet, so we need to list it that way. We also notice that 2 and 8 are not common denominators, so we need to make them that way. In order to make them common, we know that 2 and 8 will both divide evenly into 8. So 2 times 4 is 8, and 1 times 4 is 4. The bottom fraction can stay the same since it already has a denominator of 8. We know that 7 plus 4 is 11. But we also notice that the 11 is bigger than the 8, making it improper. We now have to divide bottom into top to make a mixed number. 8 will go into 11 one time. And we have a remainder of 3. So we have 1 and 3/8 as our final answer. For the next problem, we have 3/4 plus 1/12. We're also going to list this one vertically. And we see that 4 and 12 are not common. But we do know that both numbers will go evenly into 12. We know that 4 times 3 is 12, so 3 times 3 is 9. The bottom fraction can stay the same since 12 is already the denominator. So we've got 9 plus 1 is 10 over 12. We also notice that 10 over 12 can be simplified by dividing by 2's. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So our final answer is 5/6. Now, for adding and subtracting mixed numbers, our first step is to add or subtract the numerators. Then add or subtract the whole numbers. Then we'll rename and simplify if necessary. So as our first example, we have 2 1/3 plus 4 1/4, which we're listing vertically. We know that 3 and 4 will both divide evenly into 12. Three times 4 is 12, so 1 times 4 is 4. 4 times 3 is 12, so 1 times 3 is 3. We put our whole numbers in front, bring them over. We know that 4 plus 3 is 7. And we know that 2 plus 4 is 6. 7/12 cannot be simplified, so we know that our final answer would be 6 7/12. Now for some word problems. We know that Trey wants to make biscuits and muffins. He needs 2 1/4 cups of flour for the biscuits and 1 5/8 cups of flour for the muffins. How much flour does Trey need all together? By looking at our problem, we can see that our keywords are how much flour. He's got 2 1/4 cups of flour for the biscuits and 1 5/8 cups of flour for the muffins. A major word here would be all together. All together tells us that in this problem we're going to be adding. So we're going to take our fractions and list them vertically. We have 2 1/4 plus 1 5/8. We know that 4 and 8 are not common denominators. So in order to make them that way, we know that 4 and 8 will both divide evenly into 8. 4 times 2 is 8, so 1 times 2 is 2. The bottom fraction will remain the same since it already has a denominator of 8, but I can't forget to bring over my whole numbers and my operation sign. We know that 2 plus 5 is 7, and that 2 plus 1 is 3. Since 7/8 cannot be simplified, we know that Trey needs 3 7/8 cups of flour for his recipe. For the next problem, we know that Kyle read 3 5/6 books and Jan read 2 1/3 books. How many more books did Kyle read than Jan? Looking at our keywords, we see the phrase, how many more? We also know that Kyle read 3 5/6 books and Jan read 2 1/3 books. We want to know how many more. We know that how many more is a phrase often associated with subtraction. So we are going to list our fractions vertically, and we're going to subtract since it says how many more. Knowing that 6 and 3 are not common denominators, in order to turn them into common denominators, we know that 3 and 6 will both divide evenly into 6. 6 times 1 is 6. 5 times 1 is 5, so it stays the same. 3 times 2 is 6, so 1 times 2 is 2. Don't forget to bring over your whole numbers and your operation sign. We can then subtract. 5 minus 2 is 3. 3 minus 2 is 1. By looking at 1 and 3/6, we can tell that 3/6 can still be simplified. We can divide by 3. Three will go into 3 one time, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So, Kyle has read 1.5 more books than Jan. For our next example, Seth has already walked 5/8 of a mile. It takes 1 3/8 miles to get to school. How much farther does he have to go? We know by looking at our keywords that we have the phrase, how much farther. We also see that Seth has already walked 5/8 of a mile, and it takes 1 3/8 total miles to get to school. So we know that we need to subtract. Listing our fractions vertically, 1 3/8 minus 5/8. We know that we are going to subtract. In order to do that, we know that we cannot take 5 away from 3. In order to fix the problem, we know that we need to borrow. If we borrow 1 whole from the whole number side, the 1 is going to turn into a 0. And we know that we have to add that 1 whole to the fraction side. Since I already have the denominator of 8, I'm going to use 8 over 8 as my 1 whole. We know that 8 plus 3 is 11. And I can just carry over my bottom fraction. Now, I know that I can now take away 11 minus 5. And I know I end up with 6. So Seth has 6/8 of a mile, but it can be simplified. 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So he has 3/4 of a mile. Now, I want you to take your paper, and at the top where it says summary, I want you to write a 2-sentence summary of what we've discussed today in your own words. You may begin.